All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
In mid-August, these events took place. The sun did fry from the blue sky and the slopes falling nigh. The boys were sweating in the woods, they're cutting down a tree, finishing off right around midday with a nice cold kokanee. The beers were cold, but it wasn't enough to cool these fellows, no.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. This is, well, we're approaching 2 days before we hit March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, as you can tell by the Irish music we've been playing tonight. Wow. I wonder how the pubs are going to do because of the COVID epidemic that's still going on. Green beer. Gotta love it. Cabbage and corned beef. You gotta love it. That's until you go to bed and your stomach starts acting up and you have those little wisps of Irish blarney that seep out into the atmosphere. Anyway, so much for that. Great news, X-Zone Nation. My buddy Howard Bloom is with us. The Howard, as he's called here, respectfully. And Howard's been on the show for many, many years, and it's always such a great pleasure having him with us. I usually tell you everything about Howard, his bio, but tonight I'm going to let Howard tell you about the Howard. So joining me now from his bat cave somewhere in New York City, the one and only Howard Bloom. And Howard, welcome back to the X Zone, old friend.
Rob, it is a sheer pleasure to see you. So you want me to introduce myself?
Yeah, tell our listeners listeners about yourself. I mean,
that's difficult to do without coming across as an egomaniac. So I'm the author of 7 books. I appear on 545 stations every Wednesday night at 1:06 in the morning. Thanks to Coast to Coast AM, a show that you know well.
Yeah.
I have been published or given lectures at scholarly conferences in 12 different scientific fields, all the way from quantum physics and cosmology to evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, and information science and aeronautics, of all things, astronautics, space stuff. I'm the founder of the Space Development Steering Committee, which Buzz Aldrin convinced me to found 15 years ago, and Edgar Mitchell, the 6th man on the moon, was a member, and we have members from the National Science Foundation, from NASA, from the Department of Defense. I run another group that made it into Time and Newsweek way back August, I guess a year ago, for a $2 billion moon program, and that group includes David Patterson, the former governor of New York State, and who's a Democrat like me, and Newt Gingrich, who's obviously not a Democrat like me, and a 3-star General Steve Quast, and the former head of the House Committee, the House Science Committee, Robert Walker. But I'm doing 15 projects simultaneously, so, and I love to do this, Rob. I mean,
Yeah.
I call my field omnology, which is seeing the big picture that you see when you're able to transcend the silos of the individual disciplines and use each of those silos as a pixel in a grand picture to soar over it like an eagle, whereas most of my scientific colleagues are digging deep, deep tunnels so deep that they can't see, the landscape of which they are a part.
You're a fascinating guy, to say the least, Howard. You are, in fact, my hero.
Well, that would be nice, Rob.
Yeah, you are, my friend.
I admire what you've got, and you're in Crystal Beach.
Yep.
And Crystal Beach, I grew up in Buffalo, you know that.
Yes, I do.
And Crystal Beach is where my parents rented a home for the summer back when I was 5 years old. And I used to visit the summer homes of other friends up there. And it's where I saw and captured my first and possibly my last frog. So, I mean, frogs have been disappearing since then. So
Wow.
Crystal Beach is a special place for me.
Well, whenever you're around, Howard, you always have a home here with us at Crystal Beach.
Well, that's terrific. So politics has been
Oh,
changing.
my
That's
God.
another field that I'm heavily absorbed in and comment on a lot. So, what do you think of the latest shifts in politics over the 10 months since we last spoke?
Oh, my gosh. There's so much that's happened. First of all, with the change of the presidency, we'll see what happens there. Howard, I have to agree with everything that you once told me about the former president and the former administration that I defended emphatically. And I will say it here on the show, right here and now, that Howard Bloom, you were right and I was wrong.
That's an astonishing admission, Robin. It takes a true man to be able to do that. So, yes, thank God that era is
Yes.
behind us because America's been. First, we had a Cold War with the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Then we won the Cold War. The Berlin Wall fell. And in 1990 and 1989 and 1990, all of a sudden we became the world's sole superpower. Then China got its act together under Deng Xiaoping in the 80s when it allowed market elements to enter the economy and the idea of growing rich to be a positive in the eyes of the Communist Party. And it stole as many American technologies as possibly could. But remember, back in 1800, we stole as many technologies as we possibly could from the world leader in technology and manufacturing of the time, Britain.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the kind of thing that's been going on for a long, long time. Well, the Chinese people are willing to outwork Americans in extraordinary ways. You know, we want our 8-hour days, and maybe we'll get extravagant and do 9-hour days. We want our 2-day weekends. And Asians do not feel constrained by those boundaries. They're willing to work much harder, many more hours per day, and weekends too. And China has a history of scholarship that goes back 2,200 years. A history of fascination with ideas and technologies. There's a book on Chinese science up until 1850, and it's 12 volumes long.
Wow.
So science is not new to China at all. What's new is the period of humiliation that began at about 1850. China, up until then, was the center of the world. China had the world's leading export economy for close to 2,000 years, Rob. Their exports of silk were highly prized in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were a senator in the Roman Empire, your wife was begging you all the time for a new silk robe so she could show it off to the other women. Chinese ceramics were unlike anything the rest of the world had. China invented the use of tea for ceremonies. It invented the teapot. It invented the cup. It invented the saucer. And it was able to export these things. And you know the story that around 1800 or in the 1700s, an Englishman showed up with all kinds of toys. The most important were clocks. And the Chinese told him, we don't need anything of yours. We've got everything that we need. So China was the center of the world for a long time. And then in 1850, China was in the 1850s or so. China was humiliated by the Opium Wars and other wars. And China was defeated because the West had developed something that China had not developed. China was still using sail power to get around on the waterways. And we had invented steam engines. And this meant that Chinese ships were dependent on the direction of the wind. Our ships could sail directly into the wind. Plus, the Chinese had invented the cannon, and then the Turks had stolen it, and then we had stolen it, Westerners had stolen it from the Turks. But we had developed superior alloys for cannons that allowed cannons to shoot much farther than Chinese cannons. So we ended up slicing up China like a melon, was the phrase that was used in the 1900s or the 1800s. And now China is trying to get its revenge and return to its position, what it considers to be its natural position as the very center of the world. So it has its Belt and Road Initiative that ties together something like 60 countries and 3.3 billion people.
Wow.
It's a high-speed transport system for cargo that will take something from a manufacturing city in China to a seaport in Spain in 2 days with high-speed rail. They've bought up ports all over the world, South America, Africa, the Mediterranean Sea, and even North America. And they are upgrading those ports to take, if I understand this correctly, to take ocean liners, cargo ships, of a size that dwarfs the size that we are used to today.
My God.
So they're going to dominate the earth.
Let me ask you, Howard, is it true that today the the Chinese Navy is larger than the U.S. Navy?
No, the Chinese Navy is not larger than the U.S. Navy, but unless you count, the Chinese, like Americans, have a Coast Guard.
Mm-hmm.
But their Coast Guard is heavily armed, and their Coast Guard includes God knows how many thousands of vessels.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And their Coast Guard has been used to take over the South China Sea. 7 nations, the South China Sea is 1.4 million square miles of territory, rich in undersea gas and undersea oil. And 7 nations have traditionally claimed various islands in the South China Sea. Well, about 10 years ago, China started building its own islands in the South China Sea, taking coral atolls, taking these little things that were barely sprouts of islands, and building them up. And China told us, we are doing this only for peaceful purposes. And then they started to build military bases on those islands. And they started to patrol the South China Sea with peaceful vessels, meaning Coast Guard vessels, meaning armed vessels. So if you count the vessels, the Coast Guard vessels of the Chinese Navy, it is entirely possible that they have more ships than we do. But right now they are trying to equal us, to catch up with us in naval power.
Do you think that China is a threat for the United States?
China is definitely a threat to the United States. Look, if you're a member of an ant colony,
right,
how big your colony is, how much it dominates other colonies in the neighborhood counts. Because the bigger your colony, the bigger you can be. And I mean physically bigger. The more vigor and health you can have. And if your colony was yesterday's supersized colony that dominated all of the others in the neighborhood and took others as captives and slaves, which ants do, and suddenly an intruder comes and takes over that position as the biggest anthill in the neighborhood, then you're not able to grow as the biggest ant around, and your range of action is restricted, considerably restricted. Well, that's the kind of battle that's going on right now between China and the United States for dominance in the world. And we got 4 years behind with Donald Trump, unfortunately. Right. And one of the great wisdoms of our new president, Biden, is that he sees there's a major chip famine in the world. We need more computer chips. Automobile factories are having to not produce as many cars as there is demand for because they don't have enough chips for the cars right now. And Biden is sufficiently intelligent to see that that's a window of opportunity for America to get back into the chip business in a big way. And he signed executive orders several weeks ago saying we had to get back into this business no matter what it took. So he's looking at commercial opportunities and looking at technological opportunities. That's something we didn't do for 4 years, and we're now 4 years behind, and we were already behind.
All right, Howard, stand by, my friend. You and I have to take our first break in X-Zone Nation. If you'd like to find out more about our guest this hour, the one and only, the Howard, also known as Howard Bloom, visit his website, howardbloom.net. Am I correct or am I wrong, Howard?
Yes, howardbloom.net. That's it.
All right, buddy. Stand by. You and I will be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in the old stomping grounds of Howard Bloom, right here in Crystal Beach, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
It was a hot day in mid-August. These events took place. The descended fry from the blue sky.
Welcome back, everyone. Howard Bloom is my guest of this hour, www.howardbloom.net. Howard, with the, with China being at odds with America, why is there so much trade between the U.S. and China? Why is there so much?
Well, because there's there's a huge value to competition. When nations compete in technologies, when they compete in gadgetry, when they compete in the things that we use in everyday life, like cell phones and a little recorder in my pocket,
right,
and the earbuds in my ears, they uplift all of us. They upgrade all of our powers. The number of cell phones for the last 10 years in Africa was so far behind every other continent on the face of the planet, with the exception of Antarctica, in terms of infrastructure, technological infrastructure. It was ridiculous. And in those days, phones were wired to walls. Well, now that we have wireless communicators, now that we have cell phones, you didn't need a vast infrastructure. You just needed a lot of cell phone towers. And Africa has been using cell phones like crazy and developing new payment mechanisms, developing entirely new apps of its own within the environment of these new cell phones. So when two prosperous nations compete with each other to make the greatest possible contribution economically, so that they can rake in the greatest amount of money technologically, everybody wins. It's like if you're trying to found a new sport, and it's a sport nobody's ever heard of before. Let's say it involves taking a little wafer and putting it on ice and hitting it with a stick and using ice skates to get around. When you do it in just one city, it doesn't make much noise. If you get two cities involved and they battle with each other, then that rouses the dander in at least two cities. Get 12 cities to do it, then you can go nationwide. What are these teams doing when they're competing with each other? Their competition is rousing interest and hunger for hockey. And hockey, baseball, football, soccer, they all succeed through a combination of vigorous competition, and that competition just happens to be collaboration in disguise, building something bigger. And that's true as long as the United States and China compete technologically and compete with products.
Is it true, Howard, that if China was to call in all the demand loans that is held by people within the United States and even the United States government, that the United States would be bankrupt?
Well, the United States would be bankrupt, but not quite. The degree of belief in the United States and the stability and growing power of money here has remained strong. Now, it has taken some big hits in the last few years, but it has remained strong. So we would still be able to borrow enough money to continue. But the Chinese could put a huge hole in our economy if they withdrew their money. Of course, then they would lose the opportunity to make money.
Exactly. Howard, how come we haven't heard anything about North Korea lately?
We should have heard things about North Korea, because North Korea has been building its first submarine-carried ballistic missile, and it's been building submarines to carry them. And you know that at last count, it had roughly 60 nuclear weapons. So any submarine carrying ballistic missiles tipped with nuclear weapons can reach Crystal Beach, can reach Toronto, can reach Vancouver, can reach San Francisco, can reach New York City, where I'm sitting right now. So North Korea does pose an existential threat to us. But there's there's something that in my first book, The Lucifer Principle, A Scientific Expedition into the Forces of History, I call perceptual shutdown. And I tell the story of how I used to take my giant German Shepherd, Schluppy, for walks in my local park, which happens to be one of the most gorgeous parks in the world. It's at 540 acres. It's just astonishing. And most of the time when we went out onto the sheep meadow, my dog Schluppy was so enthusiastic about playing with other dogs it was ridiculous. Why? Because he was the biggest dog in the meadow. Because he could intimidate any, not that he was an intimidating dog, he was a very friendly dog. But when he made a friendly confrontation, it was obvious who was boss. Schluppy was boss. One day, somebody walked into the meadow with a dog bigger than Schluppy. And guess what Schluppy did? He averted his eyes. Normally, he was all eyes, looking for other puppies that he could play with. But this time, he swiveled his eyes in another direction. He looked sheepish, and he acted as if that big dog in the meadow did not exist. And there is a huge danger that we are going through perceptual shutdown about China right now. And that would be tragic, because when you go into perceptual shutdown, you stop perceiving your competitor as a competitor, and you stop putting in your contribution to the global brain.
So how does this work with Korea then?
Well, with Korea, I think we are going through perceptual shutdown with Korea because we have no idea of how to do anything about what North Korea is up to. It's under the protection of Russia and the protection of China. It's their sphere of interest as far as they're concerned. We probably talked about the axis of evil, but there is an alliance system. We have a formal alliance system that everybody knows about. It's called NATO. Well, there's another alliance system, and it is headed by China and Russia, and it includes North Korea, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, and Cuba. And so North Korea falls within the protective envelope of that alliance, which stays silent because, hey, it's easier to undermine us by, for example, invading all of our major computers with a bug that gives them access to any information that they want, which was done recently in the SolarWinds hack by Russia and has been done silently and stealthily by both China and in attempts by North Korea. Remember, it's 10 years ago that North Korea invaded Sony's entire computer system and drove out the president of Sony. That was North Korea, little tiny North Korea. And Iran is trying to do this to us too. So there's a new form of war. Russia calls it active measures. And it's a war in which you do things that don't look warlike, so there's no response. And you do them to sap your enemy. Donald Trump was a stooge of the Russians to a large extent. He was the most successful intelligence operation that the Russians ever pulled off in the United States, and he set America back by 4 years. But it wasn't war. It was, but it wasn't. It was not a war to which you could respond.
So what would be stopping Russia, North Korea, and China from banding together and taking out the United States?
What would stop them is the fact that we have nuclear weapons and we might respond in kind, and we would basically take out all of humanity in the process in a nuclear war. So mutually assured destruction, which was an idea born in roughly the 1960s, is still an effective idea today, and it means avoid nuclear war, avoid overt war, avoid making war with armies and navies, make war instead by cyber means, and you can achieve things you never dreamed of with your navies and your armies.
Tell me, Howard, what's your opinion of the COVID pandemic?
Well, the view on one side is that it's a hoax, and on that same side, there's another view, which it's the most violent biological attack on humans globally that we've ever seen, made by a bunch of people who prey on sex with children. And it's a group allegedly led by George Soros and Hillary Clinton and God knows whom.
Yeah.
But all of that is nonsense. Look at the number of people who have died worldwide.
Exactly.
It's roughly 2.5 million at this point. COVID is deadly serious. And there are two kinds of truth, Rob. Donald Trump's kind of truth is truth. Why? Because even though he was telling 20 lies a day, his fans believed it.
Mm-hmm.
His fans took that as reality. And one test of a truth is how many people can you recruit to that truth? Donald Trump did a terrific job of recruiting about a third of the American population to his ideas. Then there's a second test. How does it hold up in the real world? Well, Donald Trump's form of truth killed 500,000 people in the United States. It's up to 540,000 or so. And
but for our listeners, what was Donald Trump's truth when it came to COVID? For those who may not have heard this because of the international reach of the show.
It was a Democratic hoax that the Democrats were pulling in order to seize power from him and in order to impose a totalitarian dictatorship, a communist dictatorship on the United States. And those sneaky communist totalitarians, people like me, I'm a Democrat, those sneaky totalitarians were training you to imprison yourself in your own home, to show the mark of the beast by wearing a mask. They were training you to be a totalitarian idiot, a citizen of a totalitarian state. That was the Trump take. And Donald Trump told you point blank, first of all, it'll go away like a miracle. You won't believe
I remember
how
that.
It'll go away, right?
Yeah.
And secondly, on November 3rd, up until November 3rd, Election Day, you will hear headline after headline about COVID.
Mm-hmm.
On November 4th, after the election, you will never hear about COVID again. Well, guess what? An awful lot of people have died of COVID since November 3rd. And Donald Trump, we said there are two ways to test a reality.
Mm-hmm.
How many people can it convert, and how does it work against reality? All of Donald Trump's predictions, every single one of them about COVID, proved to be false. Every single one of them. And yet, even without his Twitter account, there is a substantial number of people who continue to believe in the truth of his alternative reality.
Boggles my mind why they do.
Well, it can be dangerous to your health. It can be fatal. In fact, there are people, at the Democratic Convention, a woman spoke who lost her father. Her father believed in Donald Trump and didn't believe in COVID, and went out one night to a karaoke party at a bar.
Yeah.
And somebody breathed on him, and, in the process of singing together, you spit in each other's faces.
Yeah.
You don't do it deliberately. And her father came back with COVID, and he died at a reasonably young and healthy age.
That is sad.
And she said he had a pre-existing condition for COVID. That pre-existing condition for COVID was he believed in the words of Donald Trump.
When you sit back and I was watching television on January the 6th and saw what happened at your nation's capital. Oh, what a schmozzle that was. And I'd like to talk to you about it more, but I'm just getting ready to go to my break. Howard, I can't thank you enough for the great work that you've done that I know about. I'm sure there's tons of things that you do behind the scenes for other people that no one will ever know about. So from this guy to his good friend, Howard Blum, thanks, Howard, for everything. And thank you so much for being a member of the X-Zone Nation.
Well, you are a friend, Rob.
Stand by, my friend. You and I have to take our commercial break at the bottom for the news as the X-Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in Crystal Beach, Ontario, where there's a tree by the beach that has the initials HB in them. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away, but listen, X-Zone Nation, if you'd like to find out more about the X-Zone Broadcast Network, the shows that we have, the shows that we're getting, visit www.xzbn.net. And for all of you living in Toronto and in the Ontario area who'd like to listen to a super radio station, it is CBR TV, based in Crystal Beach, Ontario. And I'm kind of proud of it since it's one of our new stations. Music, fun, talk, everything that you need to make your summers in Ontario And of course, the neighboring states, that much better. We'll be back. Don't go away.
We'll catch your fries. The proud boys quick reply. Hey ho, going fishing, but we won't be using rods. No, we'll be using sharp spears like in days of old.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Howard Bloom is my special guest this hour. www.howardbloom.net. Now, before we went to the commercial break with the news, Howard, you and I were discussing, or we were just starting to discuss, the events of January the 6th on Capitol, in Washington, D.C. And I must tell you, I was watching that, and I said, you have to be kidding.
Well, you come from a sane nation. Canada is known for being down to earth and rational. We, unfortunately, we have a much bigger population, and it houses a lot of different subcultures.
Right.
And Donald Trump encouraged a bunch of those subcultures, actually, Rob, to twist themselves together into a common fiber, a rope, and become a larger subculture. And when he clearly lost the election by 7 million votes, that kind of thing isn't clear to him. In his own mind, he is a winner. So, of course, there's no way he could have lost. And what he was doing was hunting for a way to pull off an armed insurrection.
Yes, exactly.
And this wasn't his only avenue to it. He had General McHenry, Lieutenant General Tom McHenry, and he had, his former head of national security for a while. And they were both saying, you've got to call a state of emergency, you've got to declare martial law, you've got to bring in the army, you've got to rerun the election in all of the battleground states that you lost under army control. In other words, they were talking about using force to take over the American government and forget about the democracy and pretend that they were imposing electoral integrity. And this is extraordinarily dangerous. No president has challenged the American system and the Constitution of the United States in this way before, ever.
I thought it was great when Mike Pence stood up against President Trump and said, I'm not going to do that.
Yes, it was extremely helpful that Mike Pence was willing to stick with the Constitution after 4 years of being a decal on or a tattoo on the president's derriere, which must have been a humiliating and difficult position for him many, 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 many times. So we had an armed insurrection, or the attempt at an armed insurrection. What Donald Trump was hoping for is that what he calls his sacred movement, the people who believe in him like they've never believed, like humans have never believed in any other leader in history. It helps not to know any history, so you can't really make any valid comparisons. Then you can always be the biggest in history. But he thought that if you pull off an insurrection on Capitol Hill, that insurrection will go nationwide with your, what he called his Second Amendment people all over the place, lifting their guns and coming to Donald Trump's the defense of his so-called legitimate election. And fortunately, that widespread uprising never happened. But still, Republicans to this day are pretending that January 6th didn't exist.
I was just going to ask you, how could he not have been, what's the word I'm looking for here, impeached, even though he wasn't in power anymore, even though he wasn't the president of the United States? How could those who saw what millions upon millions upon millions saw on live TV, knowing that he was at the helm of this, how he was not charged with impeachment? Am I correct in understanding because he wasn't found guilty of the charges that were brought before him that he could actually run as leader of the Republican Party and go after the presidency in another 4 years?
Yes, absolutely, and that's what he's planning to do. In the past, we've had red MAGA hats that said Trump 2016. Now there are blue MAGA hats on offer that say Trump 2024.
My good Lord.
I did a YouTube episode. I have a YouTube series, and I did a YouTube episode saying we must make it impossible for this man ever to run for president again. But Joe Biden is he's an extremely rational man. And he knew he had a limited number of things that he could accomplish. He could try to go after Donald Trump and keep him in a cage where he belongs, or he could try to put across a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. And Biden had been in charge of the $700 billion stimulus bill that revived the American economy in 2008. And he knew that amount of money was not completely adequate. So he needed a bigger package this time around. He could either go after Donald Trump and mire himself in the past, hitting the tar baby, or he could move toward the future. And he chose to move toward the future at the cost of having Donald Trump out of his cage and capable of creating God knows what kind of havoc in the future.
I find it very strange that Trump has been too quiet.
Here's what's really remarkable. There's a bunch of right-wing outlets that I get every single day and read every single day. It's things like DC Swamp Watch and WND. And occasionally I turn to Newsmax and One Nation Daily or whatever it calls itself. Trump's name has virtually disappeared from these publications. Now, Trump, you asked the question of why the Republicans refused to see the damage that was created by Donald Trump on January 6th.
Yeah.
It's because Trump has a very limited skill set. He's the dumbest man I've ever seen in any national enterprise whatsoever, with the exception of a guy named Frank DeLeo, who was Michael Jackson's manager for a while, who was also astonishingly dumb. But dumb doesn't mean you don't have cunning. And Donald Trump's skills are those of a sixth grade bully. He knows how to make up names to humiliate people. He knows how to threaten people. And he threatened those in the Republican Party so successfully that he bullied them into cowering on a daily basis before him. And as a consequence, he turned them into a homogenous party that's willing to do basically anything he says because they're terrified that he will primary them and knock them out of their seats in power. They're terrified of that because the army of people, it may only be 33% of the American public, but the army of the people who are faithful and loyal to Donald Trump believe in him to the nth degree and believe in his alternate reality as the reality, the only reality aside from a reality that supports it, and that's the reality of QAnon, which is a whole other subject, but very related to Donald Trump. So he has forced them into perceptual shutdown. He's made himself the big dog on the meadow.
The big kahuna,
that all other dogs avert their eyes from. And it's a horrible thing to see because we've got a two-party system, and one of those parties right now is operating with a lobotomy, a Donald Trump lobotomy.
So what is going to happen? The way I understand it, Howard, based on my limited knowledge of the United States and how it works, especially the two different parties, I understand that the Republican Party is severed, and basically they're a party without a leader.
They're a party without a leader, but Mitch McConnell is able to take advantage of what Donald Trump has done in terms of turning these men into quivering yellow puddles of pudding. And he's able to stop things from happening. He did that with Barack Obama, and he plans to do that for all he's worth to Joe Biden. Meanwhile, for 40 years, actually it's closer to 60, ever since Ronald Reagan, no, it's 40 years. So ever since Ronald Reagan, we've been told that we've got to stop piling up debt because we've got to stop putting debt onto the shoulders of our kids. And in the name of not piling debt on our kids, we have saddled them with $1.5 trillion in student loans. That's debt. And we've saddled them with a deteriorating infrastructure. When I go to Kuala Lumpur, their infrastructure is so far beyond that of New York City that it utterly defies belief. New York City is like a third world ruin. So we have deferred any kind of expenditure on infrastructure, with the exception of the internet, for the last 40 years.
So where did this money go that should have been spent on the infrastructure?
It went on tax reductions for the super rich.
Ah.
It went into the pockets of the super wealthy. The figures on how much money the super wealthy have made over just the last year of the COVID crisis are startling, absolutely startling. So one of the next steps Biden is going to undertake is a tax increase. It's not going to be a tax increase on people with an income like yours or mine. It's going to be a tax increase on people who make $400,000 a year or more.
Do you know that every year when I submit my taxes to the Canadian Revenue Agency, they send me a sympathy card with a box of Kleenex?
And I'm surprised I don't get a sympathy card from mine.
Jeez.
But the point is that we will go back up to the level of taxation that we should have. Why? Because we have been missing an infrastructure program.
Right.
It was promised to us by Donald Trump. He said, who else can build an infrastructure like I can? I'm the master builder. And we had no infrastructure program. We've been putting this off for 40 years, and the nation is showing it. We don't have high-speed rail, which every other major industrialized country in the world has. But we're about to get Elon Musk's high-speed transport via his Starship, which will take you from New York to Singapore in 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So there are some advances. There's the Hyperloop available, another Elon Musk brainchild. But it's time to put money into building the infrastructure of the 22nd century. Now, I don't know if that's what Biden has in mind, but at least he knows that infrastructure is vitally needed, because we have loaded approximately $6 trillion in not done, in infrastructure things that have not been done and have piled up. On those same kids, we've loaded up with $1.5 trillion in student debt in the name of not piling them up with debt. In other words, this whole business of not piling our kids up with debt was a con from the very beginning.
So what happens now? We've got all this money that is being spent. We have so many people unemployed. So many businesses are closed and closing. How is the economy going to bounce back?
Well, I look at it in terms of the cafe where I used to write my books, the Chocolateria in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And that cafe was vital to my life. I spent 6 to 8 hours a day there, 7 days a week. And in addition to getting stuff done, for some reason, I love people, and I end up creating communities in places where I get to spend enough time. So we had a really thriving community there. But the woman who owned the place, who was very dear to me, had been spending money like crazy, and she didn't have reserves.
Oh.
So she folded within 2 months of the beginning of the COVID shutdown. Now think about that. That is a thriving business place that it had taken 15 years to establish. And all of a sudden it's gone. And all of a sudden the one who held it together not only is gone from the business map, but the infrastructure she'd been building, or that the person from whom she had bought the business had been building, is gone. And that you can't get that back. You can't take 20 years of a person's lifetime and give it back to them so they can rebuild something like that. But what Joe Biden wants to do is to put together the infrastructure program we've needed for 40 years and to use it to employ the people, the 10 million people who are unemployed right now in the United States. Well, that was done in the days of the New Deal by Franklin Roosevelt, who's a role model for Joe Biden, and we'll see if it works. What we really need to do is bring back people who can do, once again, what Rosie at the Chocolateria did. Build places that function and where us human beings can meet each other and have community.
All right, Howard, please stand by, my good friend. You and I have to take our final break. And Exo Nation, if you'd like to find out more about our very interesting guest this hour, he's got some great books. I know I've got them all right here in my office on my bookcase. Visit his website, www.exonation.com. howardbloom.net. I'll be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in Crystal Beach, Ontario, Canada.
Enough to cool these fellows' snow. They figured it nice with a river swim down in the valley below. The girls agreed, but this day said, what are we gonna eat? Worry not, fish will catch and fries. The proud boys quick replied.
Just when you think it could not get worse, Craig just fired me over something from one of the news feeds. The LG, what is it?
DQ.
Are now upset because the Irish are using the word Gaelic.
You've got to be kidding
I
me.
wish I was kidding.
Amazing.
They are now demanding that the word Gaelic not be used and be taken away from all publications because it is derogatory against members of the gay community.
Well, they might have to change their name from the gay community to the twee community or something like
that. Oh my God, that's
because
just...
the word Gaelic has been taken.
This is getting ridiculous. Anyway, Howard, thanks for being on the show. Always great talking to you. I've got a question that kind of fits into New York and that little cafe that you were telling us about. What about Governor Cuomo and the mess that he apparently is in these days? Do you think he's going to be impeached?
The difficulty for Cuomo, as I see it, is that Cuomo is a bully. And Cuomo has been pushing people around for a long time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are finally fed up with it. So they are using the sexual issue to walk away from him. And he demonstrated his own degree of corruption in a sense. It's not corruption that involves money, but Cuomo had the person who's in charge of the distribution of the COVID vaccines call as many political people as possible to ask if they're still backing Cuomo. So the obvious implication, you never have to say it out loud, is if you're not backing Cuomo, you won't get your vaccine allocation. And I strongly suspect, I tried like crazy to find some place that would give me a vaccination within my hours. Because, I was in bed for 15 years, and to get out, the price was turn nocturnal, start functioning at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I could not find one. And one of the reasons may have been because our governor, Cuomo, and our mayor, de Blasio, have been at odds with each other in a running feud for as long as de Blasio has been in office. And Cuomo may have been pinching the amount of vaccines that went to New York City. By the way, I've now had my first and second vaccination.
Good.
So, but that kind of thing is, yes, it's done in politics all the time. No, it is not corrupt in the sense that money is changing hands. Is an abuse of power? Yes. Is whatever sexual accusations have been made an abuse of power? Yes. Did they happen? We do not know. It is very easy in the current environment for a woman to interpret just about anything as sexual advance. And how do you know if somebody's interested in you these days without in some way asking? No, rape is not allowed and fondling people is not allowed, but at least you should be able to put out a probe to find out if the other person is interested in you.
But if you're married like Cuomo isn't that a little ridiculous?
Is he married? I've never understood his marital status at all. I know very little about him.
Like, he's the governor, for God's sake. Shouldn't he be setting an example?
Yes, he should be setting an example. And instead, he's been this kind of politically obscure figure who's hidden in the shadows, at least from a person like me who follows international affairs, global affairs, where he hasn't counted a great deal. But there are two sides to the current Me Too environment. And one side is, no, men should not be allowed to intrude on the lives of women in a way that makes them I can't say uncomfortable because uncomfortability happens in socializing all the time, but in a way that intimidates them and pushes them up against the wall, that compromises them sexually. Um, but on the other hand, you have to be careful about making accusations against men because there is the need to send out feelers to find out if a woman is interested in you. At least if you're single, there's a need for that kind of thing, and we can't criminalize it. So we have to hit a fine balance, and we haven't hit that yet.
Something that you and I talked about briefly the last time you were on was this aerial footage of something that has been called Tic Tac that was written about in the New York Times and then all over the place. All of a sudden, that is dead news.
What was it?
Pardon?
What was it? Not TikTok itself, but
it was supposed to be a UFO.
It was supposed to be a UFO.
Yeah.
Okay, so the weird thing is this. This is the same problem we have with intergalactic civilizations. Since pretty much the same thing happens all over the universe at pretty much the same time. For example, atoms came together 380,000 years after the Big Bang, pretty much at the same time, pretty much wherever you looked in the universe. Galaxies came together at pretty much the same time, wherever you looked in the universe. You would think that life would come together pretty much at the same time,
right,
pretty much all over the universe. There should be life everywhere we look. And I talked to Carl Sagan back in the days when he was trying to found a new project, because I wanted Earth, Wind, and Fire to do and they were willing to do this, to do a fundraiser for him. And his new project was what he called SETI, was the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So we've been searching for extraterrestrial intelligence for as long as we have been letting our infrastructure go, 40 years. And guess what we found? Absolutely nothing.
That's right.
And we have, believe me, we have tried and tried and tried. These days we're trying it with supercomputers to go through what's pouring in from the cosmos toward us to see if there's any sign of a signal from anywhere. So the odds are, as hard as this is to believe, and it is very hard to believe, the odds are that we are the only life in the universe. Which, of course, is impossible, but that's what it looks like.
Is it that we're the only life in the universe, or is it that we're the only life that exists based on our carbon-based unit?
We don't know, because in theory there can be silicon-based life.
Exactly.
There can be all kinds of life. And, of course, look at how we've dematerialized our forms of communication by building cell phones and earbuds. I mean, remember the days when you showed off your manliness by having two speakers, each of which was the size of a refrigerator?
Oh, my God, yeah.
and a 120-watt amplifier. And today, all of that is condensed so much that you can put the speakers in your ears, and you can carry the player in your pocket, and you get better sound and more portable sound. So we've been dematerializing technology for a long time. Now imagine that some other species somewhere in the galaxy has managed to dematerialize things even further. And they could show up in things the size of a mote of dust, or they could show up in electronic form in a way that we have not yet imagined.
Yeah.
If they showed up in electronic form, they could travel at the speed of light, which we can't do. We can't come anywhere near doing. There are a whole bunch of possibilities available, but we've been looking for signs of these possibilities, and maybe they just don't want us to be a part of their galaxy. Who knows? We're too dangerous with our nuclear weapons and our primitive stone tool way of making war with each other and killing each other in massive amounts. Maybe they don't want that, but that's unlikely.
I've been doing this show now for 32 years this year, and nothing has changed in the world of the paranormal. Nobody has unequivocal proof that there's ghosts. Nobody has unequivocal proof that there's Bigfoot. Nobody has unequivocal proof that there are extraterrestrials or UFOs or the entire gambit. And yet, with today's technology, you would think that there would be more evidence to be produced by those who are seeking, quote unquote, the truth of the UFO embargo that is out there, and all these other claims that have never been substantiated. When we look at what is happening in the UFO field, sightings are down. Nobody's gotten any better photographs. In fact, the number of photographs being submitted to organizations that deal with UFOs have decreased.
Well, I have a friend, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Garretson, who, when he was in the Department of Defense, was the head of advanced technologies for the Air Force. And in his position as the head of advanced technologies, he went down to Roswell, New Mexico, to see the so-called aliens that we have on ice and the alien technologies we supposedly have down there. And he found nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. And he had an all-access pass.
Right.
He had top-secret clearance. My friend Edgar Mitchell, I shouldn't call him my friend, though he was my friend. He was kind enough to support me in many a political showdown. And you know that he was the sixth astronaut on the moon.
Yeah.
And he looked out the window of whatever craft he was traveling between the moon and Earth in. And he felt that there was something out there that could have been extraterrestrial. He felt it. So he founded the Institute for Noetic Science. But there was still no proof.
Yeah.
No proof from Edgar Mitchell, who believed in this kind of thing, and no proof from Peter Garretson, who doesn't believe in this kind of thing, but went to check the evidence at its source.
There are so many questions that have been raised by the people who claim that they have the evidence. And yet when push comes to shove, they cannot provide any basis of fact or evidence to substantiate the claims that they are making, except these are hand-me-down stories that they hear.
And it just may be that we humans are built with an instinct to reach out and hope that somebody from outside the system within which we are suffering will come and save us. That's what religion, a lot of it, is all about, the idea of a Messiah. I mean, the kingdom of God was supposed to come when Jesus Christ went to Jerusalem to have the last, well, now we know it as the Last Supper. He thought it would be the first supper of the kingdom of God. And it didn't turn out to be that way. So we've been looking for messiahs for a very long time, and the only messiahs turn out to be us.
This is a strange world, but I really believe that the reason why it is so strange these days is that people do not want to accept responsibility. People do not want to help come to the solutions that we all need. It's easier for them to look and join a group that is offering them utopia or the proof that the aliens are coming to save us, rather than roll up their sleeves, join the bandwagon, and help find a working solution to the problems that we're all facing.
And there's something we're achieving that we don't know. If you'd been born in 1850, your life expectancy would have been 38.5 years. If you'd been born in 2000, it would have been 78.5 years. We're more than double the human lifespan in 150 years.
Wow.
If you were the poorest paid worker in London in 2000, you would have made what an entire tenement full of dock workers made in 1850. Those would have been Irish dock workers, the poorest paid workers in England.
That's because they kept on getting advances of their pay so they could go to the pubs.
Well, and if you gave a Stanford Binet IQ test from 1916, the first year it was administered, to an average bunch of 100 kids today, they would measure as marginal geniuses. They would measure with an average IQ of 135 points. So we've added 35 points to the average IQ in a little over 100 years. We've added 4 inches to the average human height in a little over 100 years, and we've increased peace in the world by a factor of 10 since 1650.
And we've had Howard Bloom on the show many times, and Howard, I hate to say this, my friend, but our time is up. You'll be back with us shortly, Howard, because I've missed you too much, my friend. And take care of yourself, Howard, and thank you for all you do.
Rob, have a good night. May your walking be fantastic.
Okay, thanks, my friend. Hey, and keep those push-ups going.
Okay, have a
All
great
right.
night, Rob.
Good night, Howard. Exo Nation. For more information on Howard Bloom, visit his website, www.howardbloom.net. I'll be back on the other side of this news break. Don't go away.
We're not fish, we'll catch and fry. The crowd was quick reply. Hey ho, rowing fishing, but we won't be using rods. No, we'll be using sharp bears like in